In November of 1988, a young woman named Jackie Hernandez moved into a small bungalow on West 11th Street in San Pedro, California. She was pregnant with her second child, recently separated from her husband, and working multiple jobs to keep things together. She had a 2-year-old son named Jamie. She didn't have a lot of options, and this place was what she could afford. It was a small, old house in a quiet neighborhood, and she just needed somewhere to start over. She felt something the moment she moved in. She couldn't explain it and didn't say much about it at the time. She told herself it was nothing. She was exhausted, stressed, and going through one of the hardest periods of her life. Strange feelings made sense under those circumstances, but the feelings didn't go away. Within weeks, Jackie started noticing things she couldn't explain. One of the beds in the house would collapse on its own with no apparent cause. She heard muffled voices coming from the attic at night when nobody was up there. Her cat would run through the rooms as if it were chasing something moving along the walls, something Jackie couldn't see. One afternoon, while she and a friend were washing dishes in the kitchen, she noticed the walls appeared to be dripping an odd liquid. Pencils flew out of a pencil holder across the room with no one near them. She told herself there were explanations. Old houses make noise. Maybe the bed frame was broken. Maybe she was sleep-deprived and imagining things. She was a single mother working around the clock and barely holding it together. There were 100 reasons not to trust what she was seeing. Then her daughter, Samantha, was born in April of 1989. And whatever had been building in that house got worse. The sounds from the attic became louder and more frequent. Strange smells began moving through the rooms, a thick, rotten odor that she couldn't locate a source for. Objects moved. Lights appeared. One night, after putting her children to bed, Jackie walked through the darkened house and stopped in the doorway of the kids' room. Sitting in one of the beds, looking directly at her, was the figure of a haggard old man in a flannel shirt and denim suspenders. She described his eyes as glowing and his expression as completely cold. She stood there for a moment, frozen, and then he was gone. She ran to the house of her neighbor, Susan Castaneda, who had been watching Jackie's children while she worked and who had heard bits and pieces of what was happening. Susan didn't dismiss it. She had been watching a televised episode featuring a parapsychologist named Dr. Barry Taff, who had investigated alleged hauntings across California, including on board the Queen Mary in Long Beach. Susan told Jackie to call him. Jackie made the call. Dr. Barry Taff held a doctorate in psychophysiology and had spent years investigating paranormal claims. He had worked out of UCLA's former parapsychology lab and was considered one of the more serious researchers in his field. He arrived at the San Pedro house on the night of August 8, 1989, with a small team that included cameraman and television producer Barry Conrad and a photographer named Jeff Wheatcraft. They brought cameras, infrared detectors, and recording equipment. The moment they walked through the front door, the team was hit by a powerful smell, a thick, decaying odor that none of them could locate a source for. They opened the windows and aired the house out as best they could and then began the investigation. During the opening interviews with Jackie, the team heard what Taff would later describe as sounding like a 200-pound rat running through the attic above them. Loud, heavy, rhythmic crashes coming from directly above. Jackie pointed up toward the ceiling of the kitchen and told them that the attic was where she had once seen a floating, disembodied head. Before the night was over, Conrad suggested that Wheatcraft climb up through the small ceiling access panel in the kitchen and take a look around the attic. Wheatcraft went up. Within a short time, something ripped the camera out of his hands and threw it into the darkness. The lens was found separated from the camera body. Wheatcraft came back down, shaken and pale, his clothes covered in dust and spider webs. The team returned for a second visit on September 4, 1989. This time, Wheatcraft went back into the attic again, accompanied by a photographer named Gary Boehm. While the two of them were up there moving around in the dark, something happened that neither of them could account for. A clothesline cord rose up and wrapped itself around Wheatcraft's neck. It tightened. It pulled him upward until his feet left the floor and he was hanging from a nail driven into one of the main rafters, suspended by the cord around his neck. Boehm grabbed him and lifted him up to release the tension and unhook the cord from the nail. When the rest of the team pulled Wheatcraft down through the ceiling access panel, they found him pale, confused, and with a visible red mark across his throat where the cord had cut in. He was shaking. His clothes were soaked in dust. He told them that he had felt something put the cord around his neck and yank hard, hoisting him up before he could react. There is a photograph of this moment. It was taken by Bohm in the attic just before or during the incident, and it shows Wheatcraft suspended, visible marks around his neck, hanging from the rafter. The photograph has been published and examined multiple times in the decades since. Nobody has ever produced a definitive explanation of how it was staged, or confirmed that it wasn't. Jeff Wheatcraft never entered that house again. The liquid that had been dripping from the walls and kitchen cabinets was collected and sent to a laboratory for analysis. The results identified it as human blood plasma. No source for it was ever found. Jackie stayed in the house for a few more weeks after the September visit. The activity did not stop. Eventually, she took her children and left, driving north to a trailer in Kern County, roughly 300 miles away, where she moved in near family. The activity followed her. The team, Taff, Conrad, and others, traveled north to continue the investigation. One night, during a session at the trailer, Wheatcraft was physically thrown against a wall by something none of them could see and was briefly knocked unconscious. He said afterward that he had felt something squeezing his chest before impact. In the spring of 1990, Jackie returned to San Pedro to research the history of the house and the neighborhood. She had been having vivid, recurring dreams of a young man being murdered at the harbor, beaten with a lead pipe, and held underwater. She dug through old newspapers and eventually found a record of a 28-year-old seaman named Herman Hendrickson, whose body had been found floating in San Pedro Harbor on March 25, 1930. The death was officially ruled an accident by the Los Angeles Police Department. Further research led her to believe the original builder of the house was a man named John Damon. During a visit to a local cemetery, she reported being led by a ball of light to a gravestone bearing that name. The story originally aired on May 6, 1991 on Fox 11 in Los Angeles. Barry Conrad, who had documented the entire investigation on camera, later produced a full documentary called An Unknown Encounter, a true account of the San Pedro haunting, released in 1997. The documentary contains the original footage from the investigation, including the attic incidents. Dr. Taff, for his part, has always maintained that Jackie was not fabricating what was happening, but he has also said publicly that he believed she may have been unconsciously generating the phenomena herself as a result of the extreme emotional distress she was under. Poltergeist activity, in parapsychological theory, is sometimes attributed not to a specific location or spirit, but to the psychological state of a person at the center of the events. The fact that the activity lessened each time Jackie moved and eventually stopped entirely was to Taff consistent with that theory. What caused the smell? What made the cord rise? How Wheatcraft ended up hanging from that rafter? What the liquid in the walls actually was, and where it came from? None of it has ever been formally explained. The bungalow on West 11th Street in San Pedro is still standing. People have lived there in the years since. Several of them have reported hearing sounds coming from the attic.